2023 tune-ups. Let's cover kind of what's going on a little bit, then I'll get into our announcements, then we'll go ahead and roll right into this video. So what we have is Malibu steel. It's time to do a tune-up on this thing. I really can't let it go any longer. It's time to get this thing running the way it's supposed to from factory. And in order to do that, I need to get new plugs put in it and new coil packs. This is what a modern day tune-up looks like, is you need to replace the coil packs and the spark plugs. And I will show you guys the spark plugs once we get into the main part and kind of do a more in-depth look at the old plugs so that we can understand what's going on and why they need to be replaced. Guys, let's get into the announcements. Guys, thank you for all your support. Continue hitting the like, the follow, the subscribe buttons, ring that notification bell so you get notified when I do go live. My normal upload times are usually on Sunday between 1 and 4, and I do kind of another one on a different site. I'm not going to say it here, guys, because I do like the YouTube community, so I'm not going to do anything to sabotage that. If you guys got any questions throughout this podcast, you can chat them in down below. I'll read them on screen and we will work through kind of what that situation is and see if we can help you. I do have mechanics in my chat as well, so they may chime in and drop you torque specs or anything that I might not be able to readily do at that time. So let's go ahead and get into the breakdown of what we've got going on here. Let me double check my connection. Yeah. Let's break down what we've got going on. So this is a 2012 Malibu LT with the 2.4 liter. Pretty common engine, very easy to get parts for. It's not too difficult. Now we're going to be doing some upgrades to this thing, but we're also going to keep some things stock. And you might ask, why would I go on an upgrade on some, but not an upgrade on another? Let's go ahead and cover these two parts right now. Let me grab them. So what we've got are our coil packs that we're replacing and our spark plugs that we're putting in. Now, let's take a look at the coils. The reason I'm not doing upgraded coils is because upgraded coils sometimes can throw out too much voltage and mess with the computer. Also, they can also burn out plugs quicker because they're actually overloading the spark plug for what it's rated for. What I usually do is I find my manufacturer on my spark plugs and I find the manufacturer on my coils. And for GM, your manufacturer is usually a Delphi or AC Delco. So if you're going to go with ignition parts, try to keep it with the manufacturer. As you guys come in, if you got any questions, chat them in. I'll read them on the screen. So the reason that it's so important to use the ignition components from the manufacturer is that's what these things are rated for and what they're built for. If you start putting in aftermarket or upgraded coil packs, you can start throwing more spark and do damage to brand new plugs. So when it comes to coils, I stick to stock. I know that's kind of not very controversial, but it is the safest route to go with modern day computer systems. Because if you are throwing too much spark, it can mess with the computer. It can throw codes, it could cause a lean condition because it's over sparking the cylinder. There's a lot of variables that we're just not aware of. And whenever I deal with direct connections to computers, I like to keep it at the stock level. I don't like to modify unless I'm modifying the entire system. Then I'm okay with doing whatever. Then I will put the best of the best in, and I'll fully upgrade the entire system, including the computer, including the wire harnesses. So if you're going to go that route, that's the route you have to go. Know that you're going to spend a ton of money to do that, though. That is not a cheap route to go. So I've been hinting several weeks. What are we putting for an upgrade in this ignition system that's going to help us down the road? Well, we've been teased that certain spark plugs do better as far as fuel economy, torque, and just straight up horsepower. Well, we're going to go ahead and test one of the big ones that have the biggest claims on the market. Guys, if you have not seen E3 spark plugs, that's what we're going to go ahead and run in our Malibu steel. The reason I'm going to try these is I really want to bench test these for you guys. I want to put them in, see what my fuel mileage is after installation, kind of watch it as it goes, and then report back to you. If these are really good and they're worth the money, they're really not that expensive to get even at an auto parts store nowadays. And they do make quite a few different plugs for different vehicles. Now, you can't just slap any spark plug in. So you have to use what is built for that particular engine. Meaning you got to have the right thread pattern on the plug. You got to make sure that it seats exactly the same as the stock plug. There's a few other variables that make big differences, especially resistance and things like that. It has to match the OEM setup. But the reason that they're claiming the fuel mileage, and we'll see this when we get to the bench here in just a bit, is the design of the plug. The design is what really kind of gives this thing its home run as far as fuel mileage according to what they say. I'm not going to say that that's what it is yet because I have never ran these in another vehicle until now. And I'm okay with testing it because, guys, honestly, that's what we do here. We test it, we see how it works, I report back to you guys, and you guys can then make the decision beyond that to decide if you're going to choose to run the upgrades or go with the new style. So let's go ahead and head over to the bench. I want to show you guys the old plugs, kind of explain what's going on. And we will be taking a coil out, putting a new coil in, and replacing the plug. I will also cover the torque specs at that time. The reason that the torque specs are so important, even on the coil packs, is sometimes there's ground wires that run through those coils. If you don't get the torque right, it will actually not compress it and ground out the way it should, meaning that it'll try to jump and arc on top of the coil. That's not where you want that spark to go. You want it to go down through the coil, through the boot, and hit the top of the spark plug. When it hits the top of the spark plug, it will transfer through and spark. That one hurt, a little bit of a metal fragment. So this is one thing I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys right now. There is some metal flaking on these plugs, so it wouldn't hurt to take a light wire brush and make sure we remove all those metal flakes. We don't want one of those metal flakes getting down into our cylinder. We also don't want to have a bunch of metal flakes contaminate our engine and have it wreck a cylinder. So I am noticing that with these plugs. So not a big deal. I will show you that process when we hit the bench. But as the spark comes down and hits this, it will arc to the outer side of the plug. Usually they call that the point. So it comes from the point, hits the crown, that's the spark. That spark ignites your fuel, thus you have completed a cycle. This is what the ignition system does. The computer is the one that tells it when to spark. So the computer will say, okay, I need spark at cylinder 3 now. I need 1 now. And it'll send that signal. And when it sends the signal, that voltage will get carried down, and that's where the spark comes from. Let's go ahead and head to the bench quick. Okay, so here we are at the bench. You guys can see the old plugs right there, but we're going to go ahead and clean any flakes off of this plug right now. I want to make sure that this is good to go. So what I do is I use a very light brush that has somewhat coarse, and I will just lightly go across it like this. Do not go on to this point at all. Stay away from that point. But just kind of work your way around. Make sure you get all the slag off of the threads. And you don't have to get crazy and rub real hard. We're not trying to clean up the old ones and put them back in. Don't ever do that. Make sure that you keep everything clean. So that's good. Let's cover the tip on this real quick. So this is what the E3 tip looks like. It is a very different design and allows arcing across different points. And sometimes it might multi-spark in an area. What this does is gives you a much cleaner burn which means you won't use as much fuel. This will slowly tell the computer to cut the fuel back so that you're not using fuel because you're actually efficiently sparking that cylinder. So this is the secret to their spark plugs, is it's a clear shot down below and then it jumps across to the sides to spark the cylinder as the piston is coming down. Or in this case, it would be coming up. So as the piston comes up, it sparks perfectly and it's open so that it ignites the entire cylinder. That's kind of the point of their design. Let's take a look at my old ones here. So these have been in here for 130, I'm going to say 32,000 miles now. What we're noticing is a little bit of burn on the porcelain down by the metal. This is a sign that these are getting old and it would be time to replace. Need this thing to focus here. There we go. And we're noticing that we have a really large gap right here. You need to know the gapping on your spark plugs for a few different reasons, because the gapping makes all the difference on how the vehicle runs. If it hesitates or has a shake or doesn't want to accelerate very well, you could very well have spark plugs that are extremely out of gap. I've called in and found out what the gapping is for a Malibu and with the 2.4 liter engine. The gapping should be at 44. Guys, currently this thing is gapped at 70. So we are nearly, not quite, but we're close enough to double that this thing is so far out of gap that when it jumps across and arcs, the arc is extremely weak and it's having a hard time actually fully igniting the cylinder. That's what happens when you over gap your plugs. What'll happen is it doesn't fully ignite the cylinder because the arc is so weak that it won't ignite. You want to make sure that this is gapped properly. Every spark plug has a gap setting. It is good to know yours, but on ones like these, we can't gap these. So these are designed to just be replaced when the time comes. We cannot gap these. There is no way to gap that. It's got 3 points that it's soldered to here, here, and on the back side. So we can't do any kind of gapping with this style. This is just a plug and play. You leave them in for about 100,000 and you pull them out. And that's all you've got with this. Now, hopefully these things hold up and they do really good. We're going to try them. I'll let you guys know. We'll see how the fuel mileage is over time. And I'll see probably, I might give it a good, 3-4 months, and I might pull one of the plugs back out and just kind of check how it's looking and see just how far off my gapping is. I do kind of know where they are now, so I'll keep a reminder of that. But these are the tune-up components that we need. Our coils, these are our old ones, and these you can check a couple of different ways. If you want to clean these up and you look in here, sometimes you'll see a burn mark. Sometimes they put a black epoxy in here so you can't see in here, but sometimes if it's clear, you might see a big burn spot in it. That means this coil has gone bad. The other thing you can do is lightly wiggle this. I don't know if you guys can hear that. If you can, let me know. Okay, so what is going on is there's a slight clicking up here in this boot, and this could just be the porcelain tapping around in here. It could also be something that's kind of worn out in here and it's slopping around. Anytime that the spark comes into here and it has to arc or jump rather than making a straight connection without arcing, you're losing voltage to the spark plug. That's going to limit the amount of spark you have in the cylinder, which means you won't have a complete burn. The complete burn of a cylinder is how we get fuel mileage and how we lower emissions. This is the truth of the industry. This is what a lot of people don't tell people online as far as how important tune-ups are. We can really eliminate a lot of issues with emissions by doing our tune-ups on time. And when we skip these tune-ups, what happens is over time, these will start polluting more because it's not burning the cylinder clean. So simple plugs, I would say at this point, depending on the style of plug you run, if you run a iridium or you're running a double platinum, you're going to want to pull them at least 100,000 and put new plugs in. Doesn't matter where you're at. If you buy a new vehicle and you don't think it's had plugs put in it, it doesn't hurt to put them in. Pretty good setup to do. And this really does help with a lot of different things with the vehicle as far as performance and everything else. Let's cover the torque specs quick before we move over to the vehicle. So we have two torque specs. One will be on the plug itself. The other will be on the coil pack. And the bolt that we're torquing on the coil pack is this one right here. And there is a ground wire that comes down, and it is important that this is torqued to the right spec. But the plug is at 168 inch-pounds. This is roughly 14 foot-pounds. So what this does is torques it down into the cylinder. When you run this down, and you do these by hand, you don't ever try to run these down with an impact or try to put a wrench on them. What you do is you slide this into the socket like this. It'll be down in there. Slide this down. Use an extension and your hand and tighten it down by hand. Once it goes down tight, then you put your wrench on and you torque it up. That is the best way to do plugs to where you won't damage threads or wreck anything with these. Now, some people say to put a little dab of stuff on here. What I'm going to tell you guys is I don't, because I don't like having it get into the cylinder, number one. And number two, if you put too much on and you go to torque it down, you can actually over torque it and damage these threads. So it's better to keep them clean and twist it in by hand than it is to try to load this up with a bunch of anti-seize and then have issues when you over torque it and wreck something in the head. If you strip one out, you could do a helicoil. Helicoil goes over the threads on a new plug, and you have to tap out the head for a bigger thread pattern. That bigger thread pattern gets threaded down in there and then locked in. Then you can thread your new plug into it. You usually can only helicoil once, because once you go to that bigger size plug hole, it doesn't get any bigger than that. So there's only one size up from this point. You really don't want to ever do that because it can damage the head. And then when you're doing this and helicoiling, you're also machining out that head and you're getting metal shavings down inside the cylinder. So these are really bad things, and these are worst case scenario emergency repair versus pulling a head and completely replacing that head. We don't like doing that. It's expensive. It's time consuming. You try to avoid pulling the top of motors apart as much as possible, but when it does happen, sometimes that is the best repair. So what we're going to do is flip around and we're going to get started. What we want to do is pull one of our coil packs out. And I'm going to aim for one that's easy for you guys to see. First of all, I'm going to show you guys everything on the coil that we're removing, and then I'll set you guys back as I do it. So there is this gray clip. This clip has to come off. What I do is I slide this clip carefully back as far as I can, and then inside here, there's a little gray tab. You have to press that tab down as you slide the rest of this clip off. Do not lose this clip. If you do, you will have to get another one. So don't lose the clip. Once we've taken that clip, we can press the black center there and slide this plug off. We also will need to remove that bolt right there, which is a 10 millimeter. Once we remove that, we're going to take the coil pack with the bolt because it comes with new bolts. I'll just leave this bolt with this coil pack when I put it in the box so I don't have to worry about any of those issues. Like if I ever need to go back to these coils for any reason, I like to have everything that I have with the coil so I don't have to find stuff. Once we pull that, we're going to pull our spark plug out. then we can start the reinstallation process. I'm going to explain that red cable back there at the end of the video. And as always, guys, I will talk about this week's posts at the end. If you guys got any questions, chat them in. I'll do my best to answer them. And if there are mechanics in here that follow me, they will also help. Some of them are mods on my channel here, so they may answer them as I'm going if I'm in the middle of the project. Okay, so I've got my 10 millimeters set up. I have a longer ratchet that I use. This is what helps me kind of break everything loose. Flat screwdriver. I will use a needle nose if I need to, like if the boot comes out of the spark plug socket. There's a rubber boot down in there. Sometimes I need this to kind of reach down in there, grab that boot, and pull it back out. I also use 90-degree pick tools. I'll stick the pick down in there and just kind of rub up on either side to pull that boot up. And then I might go fishing for it with that. But hopefully we won't have that issue. It does happen from time to time though. So I wiggle the connector a little bit, make sure that that gray connector is loose. You don't want to break the connector, so just take my time with it. Okay. So I got to put this one over here because I got one on the bench that I got to look at. Okay. So now that I've removed that gray piece, I can go ahead and lightly press this tab down. Slide the plug off. Now, you have to be careful with some of these motors. The wire harness gets brittle. That's what that red wire is back there. It's actually a plastic loom that I had to use to replace that. And you want to put these looms back on and protect these. We're going to go ahead and tape this up when I get done. I want to show you guys how I tape those up so that those wire looms are protected. Heat really damages wire coating. So putting that insulator back on there is a huge thing that does make a difference after a few years. A few years of those exposed wires like that, especially with the exhaust manifold right behind there, will damage those wires. I'm also going to show you guys what to check underneath here, right there. We will cover that in just a little bit. Next, I've got my long ratchet set to off. And I got a 10 millimeter on my extension. I'm just going to crack this bolt loose. I kind of go slow. I don't want to get too carried away and wreck something, so I just kind of take my time with it. Again, a lot of this stuff is by hand. I don't thread anything down with ratchets. I thread it by hand using just the extension and the socket. I will pull these out of the way. Make sure you don't drop anything in your throttle body if it's open. Make sure that you put your oil cap back on. Make sure you put your oil cap back on. If you drop a bolt down in here, you're going to have to take this whole top apart to get back in there. So make sure that those are put back into place so that you don't have that issue. You guys might be asking, if I normally do my podcasts on Sunday, why have I been uploading during the week? The reason why is I've had surgery, so I'm in the healing process, and I'm trying to get some content out to you guys. And as I do that, I want to do some projects for you guys, also tell you what I've been seeing in the news, that kind of stuff. So I do check these once I take them out. That one's a little louder. I can hear that clicking a lot more in this one. So, and we did have a lot of corrosion here underneath this bolt. This is a grounding point again, like I said, so that would have needed to be cleaned up if I wanted to reuse these. But with 100,000 miles on it, I don't want to reuse these. I will get rid of these and swap them out for AC Delco or Delphi. All right, next we're going after our spark plug that's buried down in there. So what do you want to look for after you've pulled that spark plug? What you're going to do is look down into this hole. You want to see if there's any oil down in there or if there's any dirt. If there's any dirt, you want to blow that out or clean that out, vacuum it if you have to, get that clean before you pull the plug. Then next is you want to make sure there's no oil in it. If you have oil in it, that means your valve cover gasket has failed, and it doesn't pay to go any further and try to replace the plugs until you do this valve cover gasket. So I always look, make sure that it's clean. As long as it's clean, I will begin the removal of that plug. So it's clean down in there, nice and shiny, no debris. That's what we want to see. So go ahead and pop that sucker out. Now these are torqued in a little bit tighter than the coil packs, so you do have to put a little bit more effort into it. And what I do is I like to hold this from wiggling around, because if it wiggles in a weird direction, it can actually snap the plug. I don't want to have broken spark plug pieces that could fall into the cylinder. That will damage the engine. So hold this so it doesn't move, and then I just slowly pull towards me. And once it's started to come loose, I go slow. I don't just get on it and start trying to wrench it out quickly, because I don't want to do damage to the threads. And if it feels like it's super tight and not loosening up, I want to stop. I don't want to overdo it and try to pull this plug all the way out and then have it wreck the threads. If it doesn't feel right, don't take it out. And the reason I tell you that is if you don't have the tools to do a helicoil, if you don't have everything you need, stripping those threads out is the worst thing that can happen. So take your time, go slow. Once you do get it loose, remove it by hand. If you go probably more than 4 turns round and it doesn't feel like it's loosening up, either tighten it back down or leave it alone. So just like that, I can pull this out. Now we can take a look at this one here while we got it. So here's our plug. This looks really good. We don't have a bunch of oil on here or debris. We do notice a little bit of whiting color. That's normal. We want to see that. We also will be looking at this gap and how this point has been hitting on the spark. Sometimes it will shave this point down and it'll have one side will be higher than the other. That means that it's been arcing that distance and chewing that metal away as it's been sparking. So we do that. I also slide it out. Again, this one looks really bad down here, guys. This is what a plug with 130,000 miles looks like. You get a lot of this burning and charring of the porcelain down by the metal. This is not a good sign. This means that these plugs were in here too long. These plugs should have been pulled 30,000 miles ago. For curiosity's sake, I'm going to grab the gapper and we're going to see how far off this gap is. So my gapping tool has a bunch of numbers on it. 40,000, 60,000, 44. This is what they should be gapped at, is 44. It's got a 50, it's got an 80, and it's got a 45. So we'll do the 44. There is a pretty good gap there. So that was 44. That slid in without having too much issue. Let's try the 60. Okay, 60 is snug. If I force it, I could probably get it in, but you don't ever force it, especially if you have a double platinum or a iridium plug. You'll either break the iridium tips off or you could wreck the point. You don't ever want to force it. It should lightly go in with no pressure. Let's jump over to the 50. I know that for a fact that the 50 is going to go right through. Yep. So that 50 went right through. If I was to take the time to gap this out properly, I'm going to guess that I am at probably about 58 thousandths. That's where I'm at on the gap. That's extreme. If it's supposed to be at 44, we're already 10 over what it's supposed to be. That makes a big difference on fuel mileage, on horsepower, on torque, and on emissions. This is why we do the repair, guys. This is why we change our plugs and do our tune-ups. Okay, so I've grabbed my torque wrench. I've got it set to the 168 inch-pounds. That's what we're going to use to torque this up. I'm going to go ahead and grab my same extension that I just used, and I'm going to lightly slide my plug into this. I don't want to force it all the way in, because the more you force your plugs into here, the higher chance they're going to get stuck, and you're going to wind up pulling out that boot that's in there. Do not put anything on that rubber boot. If you try to tape it, it's just going to wedge in the plug and it will stay on the spark plug when you go to pull the socket off. Another good tip is buy extensions that have a lock on it right here. Those locks mean that it'll stay onto the socket when you pull this up. So that does help. That's a little trick. I will be buying one of those extensions soon, but for now, I'm going to use what I got. This is all ready. Let's go ahead and set it down in. And we're going to thread this down by hand. Okay. So this is what happens if you don't have it clicked in all the way. You guys just saw it drop all the way in. You do not want to stick the extension down in there at this point. And you want to inspect that spark plug and make sure it didn't do any damage to the plug. So I will use a magnet. Pick up my spark plug out of there. And now I'm going to begin an inspection process. I'm glad this happened so that you guys could see it. So when it dropped, we want to make sure that it didn't damage any threads and that it didn't damage our point. Now, because this one has 3 points on it, I don't think it would have damaged my point by it dropping out of the socket. And we're also going to check the porcelain to make sure the porcelain did not crack. If you ever drop one of these plugs, do this inspection. If anything looks off, even a little nick in the threads or a little bit of damage to this point, don't use the plug, get a different one. You do not want to take the chance of putting one in and having it break and pieces go down into the cylinder. That is really worst case scenario, guys. So I've got it in there now. I do have this to where it isn't going to fall out. Let's go ahead and drop it down in there. And when we set it down in, we're actually going slow because we don't want to smash that point down onto the head. Okay, by hand. I'm using a pointer finger and thumb to just twist the extension until that spark plug seats all the way down. Okay, it feels like it's close. I usually take my hand one time, just kind of give it a good twist, make sure it's tight, because that does really make a difference when I'm torquing it. I won't have to turn it as far to get that final torque. So I do grab it, make a good hard twist on it, make sure that it's tight before I click my torque wrench on. And now I'm just going to do a final torque. Right there, we're done. So this plug is done. Now I have to get this out of here with the plug and the boot. You want to make sure you don't leave the socket down in there, and you don't want to leave that rubber boot in there. So I do kind of do a wiggle a little bit, trying to get it to loosen up. This is why having an extension that has a lever on it makes all the difference. Because the lever will allow it to stay locked onto the socket. If you have old extensions, guys, the old extensions, the point does not hold very tight. So let me show you why you have problems with this. Right here, this little socket piece right here, the older the extension, the weaker this spring will be because you've snapped so many sockets on it. That's the problem that I was having with this. This one's really weak. I can press this all the way in with my fingernail. So this one I can press all the way in with my fingernail. This one I can't. So when you go to remove them, use an extension that has a good point on it, or buy the one that has the locking lever. Because when you snap this on, you do not want this coming off. You want to be able to pull it all the way out. The other thing to look for is make sure that your rubber boot down in there, this is designed to not break the porcelain. Make sure that stays in the socket and not onto the spark plug down in the cylinder. Now that we've done that, I'm adjusting everything to put my coil pack on. So got my 10mm back on with my ratchet. I got to reset my torque wrench. So this torque setting is 80 inch-pounds. So I twist this down until I'm at 80. So right there I'm at 80. A little hard to see on camera. Kind of looks like 90 because the points are so close, but you guys can see the 90 right there. It drops down a little bit to the main line, and then there's a little gap between there. So that's at 80 inch-pounds. Now I can grab my coil. Bench is a mess. There's my coil. Okay. So what you can do is you can put a little bit of grease around here. Don't get carried away. You don't want a lot on here to where it's going to drip down and arc. Again, we don't want any arcing whatsoever. That arcing can actually cause damage. So as long as these are clean and it slides down nice and cleanly, that's what you want. What I always do is I take this bolt out, carefully pull this out, and then I set this down. Here is that ground that I talked about. So if there's a lot of rust and corrosion around here, that has to get cleaned up. If you don't clean that up, it doesn't ground properly. You can see where it kind of grounds on this side when you guys tighten that up to the actual valve cover. So let's drop this down. What I do is I make sure my wire is out of the way, like this. And just slowly wiggle it down into place, trying to keep it lined up so when I drop the bolt in, it just goes straight in and I don't have to fish for the hole. Again, all by hand. I'm not putting wrenches on it until I'm ready to kind of do all my torquing. Okay. So 80 inch-pounds. Okay, the click means that I've reached the torque spec. That's where it needs to be. Mechanics that are on here, you guys already know how to use a torque wrench. I'm not teaching you guys anything new at this point. I might be showing you guys a trick or two that you either forgot or don't use often because you depends on how much you do stuff. I'm going to butcher your name here, but Zino Uzman, hi. I see your hand wave. Hi. So glad if you guys got anything, chat it in down below. I always read my chats. So now that I've got that done, the last piece of this tune-up is to put the clip back into place. This clip holds the wire harness on so that it can't wiggle off. You want this clip put back on. This isn't a job where you want to have a bunch of leftover parts. The truth is you want to make sure all your parts are put into place. Make sure everything's tight and snapped in. Make sure your coils are on. Now I've got 3 of them on. I'm saving one for when I go live on my other site. Then I'm going to go ahead and do that one. When I do that, I'm going to go ahead and start it up. Let me get you spun around here and we'll continue on. Yeah, if you guys are chatting from different parts of the country, go ahead and chat in where you're from. It's always kind of interesting to see who I'm reaching and how far around the world, my podcasts actually go. It's kind of cool to see that. I do like that. Let me grab something to drink quick. So a final touch up as far as what I would recommend for your guys' vehicles. Make sure that you buy the proper parts. Make sure you follow everything the way you're supposed to and look for the torque specs online. Make sure you have them before you start the project. If you don't torque these down properly, you will have cylinder blow-by, which is extremely bad. Now, this is the first time I've talked about it in this video, but I do want to cover this. Cylinder blow-by will affect fuel mileage, it will affect emissions, it will affect even potential damage to the engine. So torquing those spark plugs down is very important. Anyone who just gets on it with a wrench and starts cranking on it, you are really doing a bad job when it comes to doing a tune-up. You can wreck a lot of components, you can damage the head, you can also snap off a spark plug. So just getting on it and trying to wrench on it with a bar, bad idea. Find the torque specs, use a torque wrench, and your repairs will be successful. Plus, if you torque the stuff properly, when you go to take it apart next time, it'll come apart a lot easier. You won't have to fight to try to get stuff apart. If you over torque it, you're going to have to fight to get the stuff back out next time. Now, knowing that I'm going to pull these probably in a good 3-6 months just to kind of check the plug and make sure everything looks good on it, I really don't want to over torque these because I do have to go back in there to be able to show you guys what's going on. That's important for me because it does help me down the road, but at the same time, it does help you when you're doing your next tune-up. If you guys are running a single platinum or a copper plug, just know you're probably going to do plugs maybe once every couple of years, maybe 2. The reason why is those don't last as long. So if you find out you're running a copper plug, just know you're going to be putting spark plugs in more often. Now, a lot of newer vehicles or even the older ones, they are upgrading them to either the double platinum or the iridium. The double platinums will last right up to that 100,000, but they are pretty much done at that point. They don't have much life left in them. The iridiums are lasting right up to the 100. They can go a little bit longer. You're pretty good on that. I wouldn't go too far over that though, because again, once that gapping gets too far, that's when you run into issues. Anything else on the tune-up is when you're taking stuff apart, always check. You want to check those wire harnesses like I talked about. If you got wire looms that are brittle and breaking, replace the loom. I do want to cover that fuel line. Let's do that right now because this fuel line is super important. And I noticed an issue on these, and you're going to want to check yours if you have a Malibu because it's right next to a spot where it could rub that fuel line through and cause an engine fire. I'm surprised GM has not put out a recall for this. So this is the bracket that holds the fuel line. And this is the clip that is attached to the bracket. This is your main feed for your fuel line. Here's your fuel rail with your inspection port. This will rub against this plastic piece. Mine already has a slight nick in this black barb, but it's not through far enough for me to worry about it. Whenever you're inspecting, make sure you check this fuel line. Do not let it rub on this, which is your vent purge off of your motor for your evap system. This is your oil fill neck. Make sure that it's in between. I took and I bent my bracket slightly to make sure that it runs perfectly between these two items. So I wanted it perfectly spaced in between here. That one was really important, guys. I wanted to show you guys that because we've had too many issues with recalls and engine fires due to fuel lines either breaking or rubbing through. Anytime you're doing this kind of tune-up and you have the covers off and you can see everything, check those fuel lines. See where they're running, see if there's anything rubbing against them. This is the best time to catch it while you're doing this. What that fuel line tells me, somebody has been inside the top of this engine at one point to do something that they had to disconnect the fuel lines. What I would guess, based on what I've seen, they might have put a valve cover gasket in it. That being said, they didn't put everything back together the way they should. You should never have parts left over. There should never be bolts left over. No, you didn't make it better by leaving 3 bolts out. You forgot something, and those 3 bolts could be attached to a fuel line that might rub through because you didn't put those back in. If you break any plastic clips, make sure you get those replaced or put them back in the way they're supposed to be. I have had to rewire harnesses because people forgot to put the clips back in it and the plug will not stay into place. So what I've had to do is take and pull everything apart, pull the wire looms out, cut the wires back far enough, or rerun the wires and put new connectors on everything. I don't like doing those kind of repairs, but I've done a lot of those in the future, or in the past. In the past. I'll probably do a lot more in the future because it does happen. People fix their stuff, but they don't fix their stuff. And I see a lot of vehicles come into my little garage that I have, and I noticed that something was done at a repair shop and they didn't put the wires where they belong. So either a wire rubbed through, or when it didn't get clicked on properly, it slid off. When it slides off, it'll create an engine code. That engine code is a good way to figure out what's going on. Guys, if you didn't get a chance, go check out my scan tool video. I did that here, I want to say a couple of podcasts ago. I would have been last week sometime. That one's a good one to watch as far as a breakdown of what a good scan tool is and what you guys could use to really help you out when you're doing those kind of repairs. The scan tool is our greatest asset right now on newer vehicles because it allows us to see and test certain things. Some of the stuff that you can buy for scan tools, I'll just give you kind of a quick rundown here. Some of the stuff you can buy, it does make a difference on the quality of scanner you buy. If you buy just a basic engine scanner, that's all you're going to get. Sometimes you want that live data. That live data is uber important because you can really kind of figure out what's going on with the vehicle. And if you know where things are supposed to run, like where your mass airflow sensor is supposed to read or what your air intake temperature is supposed to be, if you know what those things are, you can look at that live data and go, I've got a problem there. There's something not reading right. That will give you more diagnosis to what's going on with the vehicle. So good scan tools are worth their money. I do talk about all that in that video in depth. Go check that out after this one, and you guys will see a lot of good, solid information. Again, guys, thank you for all the support. Hit that like, hit the subscribe button, and ring the notification bell. I do go live every Sunday from 1 to 4 here on YouTube. I do flip over to a different channel, and I will podcast over there as well. So if there's something that we don't see here, you might see it over there, and vice versa. So You guys won't see me fire this up because I have one more coil to do, and I can't fire it up because my upper intake piece is off. If this isn't down, it'll throw a check engine light because it won't pull air through my mass airflow sensor down into the engine. It won't read right. So I can't do that. I can't fire it up now, but I will be doing that fire up and testing it. That'll be a good way for you guys to kind of see what's going on. Lastly, let's talk about some of the posts that I've made. Guys, I know some people are huge EV fans. I am not. And when it comes down to it, there was a recent study done that people who have EVs, at least 46% of people that owned EVs currently said they would not buy another EV. The reason for this is the amount of charging stations that are available outside of a major metropolitan area. I've been saying this since EVs came on the market, that the charging grid stations are not there. The power demand that we need to convert everyone over is not there. As we eliminate power source options, such as either coal plants or even cannot think of that for the life of me right now, uranium powered energy, that means that there's less electrical available. This is a huge problem within the EV market, guys. We don't want to see this if we're really trying to push for that EV market, because this means that most people are not going to go to it. And this is what we saw. And I said the only way they were going to ever fix this whole EV situation is to make EVs self-sustaining, meaning you need that vehicle to generate electricity to charge the batteries. The only problem with that is nobody's going to make money on a setup like that, because once the vehicle can make its own electricity, you don't need to plug it into a wall. That won't ever happen because there are enough stuff going on currently in the government that's saying that won't happen, at least here in the US. Wherever you're from, it might be different, but at least here in the US, it really is about the money. So that being said, that's the situation that we're going to run into. And we'll just have to kind of wait and see how that all plays out and what happens with that. But as of right now, a lot of people are saying they're stepping back from EV and their next vehicle is going to be a gasoline powered vehicle. Honestly, I don't blame them. I don't think we should have been pushing and forcing EVs the way we were. It's just kind of the lay of the land. Now, we'll see what happens over the next year or two. I do think that there are people that are going to push it because they're able to control vehicles. There's been a lot going on as far as updates with EVs that are allowing parental controls. And we do have to question who has access to those parental controls. Does the manufacturer, does whoever the information that's being uploaded, do they have a way of back channeling and controlling the vehicle? Ford was working on something that allowed them to repo cars when people wouldn't pay the bill because they would use the autopilot feature. Autopilots have somewhat been deemed illegal as of right now. So they're patching a lot of that stuff out because the autopilot feature has made it to where people are just being lazy and they're not actually driving their car, and these cars are crashing because the cars are not good at sensing what happens in real time. They can only see what their sensors can see, and if it's a blind spot, it can't control what's going to happen. As a person driving the car, you're scanning constantly, you're watching what's going on, you're paying attention to stuff. You might see something coming that those sensors will never pick up. And that's why the autopilot feature will never be successful, is the amount of scanners that they will have to have on it, the amount of third eyes that they'll have to visually have everything visible will cost them too much money. And that cost will then have to trickle down into the vehicles. So we do have to kind of start telling manufacturers, hey, we don't like this. We don't like this tech. We're not going to buy this. If you're going to put it in your more expensive vehicles, we'll go with the little cheaper one. And we're starting to see that, especially in younger buyers right now. They're actually buying the base model of vehicles because they have less technical stuff in it that can go wrong, that can be costly to fix. Plus, it's also sending a message to the manufacturers that they don't want that kind of tech in their vehicle, meaning that they just want something that gets them back and forth without having a bunch of problems with it. So that's kind of where we're at with the EV stuff, guys. I really wanted to bring that topic to you. This is how you guys do a tune-up on your car. Now, there's one other item you can do to help better your fuel mileage, and it's so basic, anyone can do it with either basic hand tools or with your own hands. Replace your air filter. If you replace your air filter and you get clean, smooth flowing air in, you will get better fuel mileage. And that's ultimately the point of doing tune-ups, is getting that fuel mileage back, not spending so much at the pump. We try to eliminate how much we spend at the pump, especially if we drive a lot of miles. Doing your tune-ups is one way to do it. Air filter, coils, plugs. There is one last kind of caveat. I did a video on this, and it's cleaning your throttle body. That one is more advanced. Make sure you guys watch that full video if you're going to attempt cleaning throttle bodies. There's a lot to know, especially on newer vehicles, that if you don't do it right, you damage the throttle body. I did it on this vehicle. I did the podcast on it, and you guys can go back, check it out in my channel, and you guys will see it. I did that cleaning, and it worked great. I did not wind up replacing the throttle body, and I got it perfectly clean. Now, there's one more mod that we're going to wind up doing to this thing, because I'm noticing that it's sucking oil out of the top of the valve cover through the intake tube. This is the basically the recirculation for the EGR system. What it does is it pulls air out of the top of the intake, filters it down into the intake tube that goes back into the engine. What this does is cuts down on blow-by. You don't want to see a bunch of blow-by coming out of the engine, so people want to cap that, put it back into the engine. This is... Okay, I'm far enough in the video, I'll just go ahead and say it. The system that they have and the way they have it set up, this is like eating your own poop. Hate to be that graphic, but that's what it is. What's happening is it's taking all of the gases and everything into the top of that valve cover, and it's spitting it into the intake, and it's getting flushed right back into the intake. What that's doing is dumping oil down inside the intake. This is why people run oil catch cans and why I recommend oil catch cans, but you have to clean them out. That's another tune-up thing, that if you guys decide to go with an oil catch can, make sure that you drain it and you clean it out regularly. Usually I tell people, if you have an oil catch can, check it every oil change. If you're good at every oil change, you can then go, every gas fill up, check that oil catch can. If you're good on that, then skip a gas fill up and check it then. If you let it go for a full oil change, like I accidentally said, if you guys let it go for a full oil change, what'll happen is it'll overfill and it'll start dumping right back into the intake, and it totally defeats the purpose of having that oil catch can. We may custom make one for this car, guys. If you do want to see that, leave that as a suggestion down below, and I will do that. What I might do until then, though, is I might be doing a mod. You guys can see this coming up soon, that I will actually put a breather on it. And what that breather does is then vents that out to the atmosphere. If you live in a state that does emissions testing, you're not going to be able to get away with this. It won't work. They're going to fail you right on the spot as soon as that happens. So if you do this to your car, make sure you pull it back off and plug everything back in the way it's supposed to be when you go to do your emissions testing. When you're done with your emissions testing, you can then undo it and put the filter back on it. This way, you're not sucking oil back into the engine. So that one's coming up, guys, real soon, because I just cleaned this throttle body. I noticed some soot in it, and I don't want to keep doing what I'm doing. I want to kind of get to this so I don't have to do that all the time. Again, guys, thank you for all the support. Thank you guys for tuning in. This one was on how to do a tune-up. Make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and ring that notification bell so you guys get notified when I go live. My next one will probably be Friday, just so that you guys have an idea. So next Friday, I'll be going live probably about the same time, and we might be doing that mod that I just talked about. Guys, thank you, and I'll see you guys on the next one.